Most people believe that success has an age, a color, or a specific background. But what if I told you that a 17-year-old black boy proved that all these barriers are just illusions created by those who fear change? Imagine walking into a courtroom filled with seasoned lawyers and strict judges, only to be treated as a joke before even saying a single word. That's exactly what José Rafael faced. Except instead of backing down, he did something no one expected and left the judge completely speechless. This isn't just another inspirational story, it's a reality check for a system that still tries to define who can and who cannot succeed. How did a young man from the slums, raised by a single mother working as a house cleaner, manage to become one of the most brilliant lawyers in the country? How did he defeat a powerful corporation in court, even when everyone doubted him? What did he do differently that turned his struggle into a legacy? Get ready, because what you're about to hear might change the way you see your own limits. This is the story of a genius in law who didn't just break barriers, he shattered them completely. And the most incredible part, you can learn exactly how he did it. The rain fell lazily that grey morning in São Paulo, painting the sidewalks with misty reflections. In the midst of this scene, José Rafael crossed the doors of the João Mendes Forum, wearing a suit that contrasted with the youth etched on his face. He wasn't a defendant nor a frightened witness. He was a lawyer. But the mere sight of a 17-year-old black young man walking confidently through the hallways already triggered murmurs and side glances from the suited-up attorneys. Some whispered among themselves, trying to figure out who this boy was and why he seemed so out of place. Others, like Judge Joaquim Braga, observed silently, furrowing their brows as if witnessing something impossible. José knew that before even speaking a word, he had already been judged by many in that room. His eyes scanned the space, but his posture remained impeccable. He had faced these same looks throughout his life, in school, on the streets, in job interviews where people tried to convince him that it wasn't his time yet. But he learned early on that the world wouldn't wait for him to be ready. He had to always be ahead. The courthouse, that stage of selective justice, was just another obstacle he had learned to navigate. His steps were firm, and the determination on his face left no doubts. He wasn't an outsider. He was there to make history. As he took his seat at the defense table, his ears caught the loose comments flying around. "What is this kid doing here?" whispered a middle-aged lawyer, adjusting his tie with disdain. José just smiled slightly. He had read about this in the books he devoured. The first instinct of society when faced with something disruptive is not acceptance, but rejection. After all, when someone challenges the norm, those who benefit from the status quo feel threatened. It happens in science, in art, in business, and in law. It wouldn't be any different. But the truth always finds its way. And on that day, the truth was about to be revealed in the most unexpected way. When the case was called, an almost palpable silence settled in the courtroom. José stood up calmly, and as he opened his mouth, everyone present felt the weight of the words they were about to hear. Judge Joaquim Braga adjusted his glasses and frowned when he heard the name of the next case. He lifted his eyes from the case files, scanning the room expectantly, waiting for an experienced lawyer to stand up and represent Mrs. Marta Silva. But what happened next made the entire courtroom hold its breath. José Rafael, the 17-year-old who had already been the target of doubtful stares since entering the courthouse, stood up with confidence and announced in a clear and well-articulated voice, "Your Honor, I am the defense attorney." The silence that followed was almost as loud as the thunder rumbling outside. The suited-up attorneys exchanged glances, some discreetly smirking. Even Judge Braga raised his eyebrows, as if he had just heard an unexpected joke. "Excuse me, but are you saying you are the defense attorney?" he asked, emphasizing the word attorney with a tone heavy with disbelief. The room exploded into murmurs, as if an error had been made. Was he an insolent intern? A confused young man who had walked into the wrong courtroom? But José didn't waver. He maintained his posture, shoulders squared, eyes steady. He had anticipated this reaction. He knew that before any legal argument, he would have to prove something even more difficult, that he belonged there. The sarcasm didn't take long to appear. "Is this some kind of joke?" muttered one of the company's lawyers, adjusting the lapel of his suit. Jose felt a chill in his stomach, but it wasn't fear. It was the same old indignation, the one that had followed him since school, when teachers doubted his abilities simply because of where he came from. He had learned that in these moments, you don't fight fire with fire, you fight it with facts. He took a deep breath and responded without a hint of hesitation. "No, Your Honor. I am a registered attorney. I am here to defend my client." Judge Braga blinked a few times, surprised by the young man's composure. The nervous laughter faded, replaced by doubtful expressions. What once seemed impossible now demanded an explanation. How could a 17-year-old achieve such a feat? And more importantly, how did he plan to sustain his position against the obvious resistance he was facing? The questions lingered in the air, but Jose already knew exactly how to answer them. Judge Braga remained skeptical, his fingers drumming against the wooden podium. The entire room seemed frozen in a bubble of disbelief, as if everyone was just waiting for Jose Rafael to admit that this was all some misunderstanding. But instead, he kept his composure and, with calculated movements, pulled out an official document from his briefcase. With the same firmness he had spoken with before, he walked up to the judge and handed him his Bar Association credential. The silence in the courtroom shifted. It was no longer just disbelief, it was astonishment, mixed with something else, a hint of respect. The judge took the paper, adjusted his glasses once more, and read every line carefully. The murmurs returned, but this time they carried a different tone. Attorneys who had doubted his presence began whispering among themselves, trying to understand how such a young man had managed to graduate so early, and more importantly, pass the notoriously difficult bar exam, a test that even experienced professionals feared. The judge, without looking up, finally broke the silence. "Mr. Rafael, could you explain how someone your age managed to achieve this?" His tone was no longer sarcastic, but filled with genuine curiosity, though still laced with skepticism. Jose smirked slightly. It was a question he had answered many times before. "Through a lot of studying, Your Honor," he replied, not with arrogance, but with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. He didn't mention the sleepless nights, the overwhelming exhaustion, or the countless hours spent in the library while his friends played soccer outside. He didn't bring up the surprised looks from teachers when they realized he was learning at an accelerated pace, or the doubts that had crept into his own mind along the way. All of that was condensed into one simple statement: through a lot of studying. Because at the end of the day, that was what separated those who succeeded from those who quit. Judge Braga spent a few more seconds observing Jose before handing back the credential. His gaze had changed. There was still doubt, but now it was mixed with something else: acknowledgement. The boy might have been young, but he wasn't a fraud. Now he had formal permission to continue in the courtroom. But proving that he had the right to be there was one thing. Proving that he had the ability to win the case was an entirely different challenge, and that battle was about to begin. Jose Rafael wasn't born into privilege, far from it. He grew up in Paraisópolis, one of São Paulo's largest slums, where dreams had no space for naivety. His mother, Marta, worked as a house cleaner, leaving home before sunrise and returning late at night, exhausted but determined to give her son something she had never had: opportunity. From an early age, Jose understood that knowledge was the only bridge between his community and the world beyond. While other kids ran through the alleyways, he devoured old books from second-hand shops or borrowed them from school. His mother couldn't afford expensive toys, but she gave him something far more valuable: the belief that intelligence was his greatest weapon. At 10 years old, Jose caught the attention of his teachers with his exceptional learning ability. While his classmates struggled with fractions, he was already solving complex equations. This uncommon brilliance earned him a scholarship at one of the city's most prestigious private schools. But while this opened doors for him, it also brought unexpected challenges. Prejudice wasn't long in coming. In the hallways he heard jokes about his background, his simple clothes, his place in society. Some teachers treated him with condescension, as if his presence was just a social experiment. But Jose didn't let it shake him. He knew that if he waited for acceptance to grow, he would never get anywhere. It was during this time that he discovered his passion for law. Inspired by stories of great jurists and fiery debates on social justice, he began studying on his own, devouring books that seemed written for people much older than him. He wasn't satisfied with just understanding what was taught at school. He wanted more. And that thirst for knowledge led him to something extraordinary, a study method so effective that he managed to fast-track years of learning in a short period. By the time he was 15, he had already mastered university-level content. At 16, he took the law school entrance exam and passed with flying colors. But his biggest challenge was yet to come. Graduating wasn't enough. He needed to prove that a young black boy from the slums could compete on equal footing with those who had always had everything. So, while many doubted him, he prepared for the bar exam, a test that terrorized thousands of law graduates, and against all odds, he passed on his first try. At just 17 years old, he became an officially licensed lawyer, but deep down he knew that a diploma wouldn't instantly change mindsets. He would still have to prove himself again and again. And in that courtroom, under the doubtful gazes of the judge and the attorneys, he was about to do exactly that. Jose Rafael adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. He knew this wasn't just any case. Marta Silva, the woman he was representing, was on the verge of losing everything to a powerful corporation that, like so many others, used its influence to crush the weaker side. The land where Marta had lived for decades, where she had raised her children, was now at the center of a brutal legal dispute. On the other side, seasoned attorneys who were used to winning with ease. And him? A 17-year-old boy whom many in the room still saw as a fraud. But Jose wasn't naive. He knew that in court it wasn't enough to have the truth on your side. You had to convince those who had the power to decide. The corporation's lawyer, Marcos Tavares, looked at Jose with a subtle smirk, the kind that carried more disdain than politeness. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he began, addressing Judge Braga, "I don't think we should waste time with unnecessary formalities. My team is prepared to resolve this quickly." The message was clear. They didn't take Jose seriously. He was a minor obstacle, a mere formality in their path to yet another effortless victory. But if Jose had learned anything in life, it was that those who underestimate their opponent are usually the first to fall. He didn't respond with arrogance. Instead, he opened his briefcase, pulled out a set of documents, and began presenting his case with surgical precision. He explained, citing articles from the Civil Code, how the company was illegally attempting to evict Marta Silva. He pointed out loopholes in the defense's arguments, questioned the validity of certain documents, and made it clear that he wasn't there just to observe. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with side conversations, gradually fell silent. Even Judge Braga, who had initially seemed hesitant about the young lawyer's presence, leaned forward slightly, analyzing each of Jose's words with newfound interest. But Jose knew the resistance wouldn't end there. Even with solid arguments, the system wouldn't change overnight. He needed something more. An irrefutable piece of evidence, a game-changer that would force the judge to look beyond appearances. And he had exactly that. What no one knew was that Jose was about to present proof so undeniable that even Marcos Tavares wouldn't be able to dismiss it. Jose Rafael remained calm as he pulled out another set of documents from his briefcase. His eyes scanned the room, noticing the overconfidence plastered on Marcos Tavares's face. The corporate lawyer was convinced he would win. That's how it always worked. Powerful companies manipulated paperwork, twisted laws, and walked away unscathed. But not this time. Holding the papers firmly, Jose turned to Judge Braga and said, "Your Honor, I would like to present new evidence that completely changes the course of this case." A buzz rippled through the courtroom. Marcos Tavares smirked, crossing his arms as if he were about to watch another futile attempt to overturn the inevitable. But as Jose began to detail the evidence, Tavares's smirk faded. With surgical precision, Jose pointed out inconsistencies in the company's documentation. Signatures didn't match. The ownership records had been tampered with. Dates had been altered to fabricate a false legal history. Jose wasn't just exposing the fraud. He was making it so clear that even a layperson in the audience could understand. "Here," he said, holding up a particular document, We see that the company altered the original records to make it seem like Mrs. Marta Silva never owned this property. However, when we cross-check this with public records, we find the discrepancy. He slid the evidence onto the judge's desk, and Braga picked up the papers, his expression growing more serious with each page he turned. The room went silent. The weight of the revelation began to settle over everyone present. Judge Braga adjusted his glasses and leafed through the pages, his brows furrowing deeper. Marcos Tavares tried to intervene, arguing that the information was irrelevant, but José didn't give him space. "Irrelevant, Counselor?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "Are you saying that falsifying documents to steal someone's home is irrelevant?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. A few heads turned toward Tavares, waiting for his response. The corporate lawyer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. José knew he had turned the tide, but there was still one last battle. He needed to face Tavares head-on, dismantling whatever argument he still had left to save his case. And judging by the way Tavares tightened his jaw and straightened his tie, José could tell that the real fight was just about to begin. Marcos Tavares shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing at José Rafael. The corporate lawyer no longer looked as confident as before, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. With a voice dripping with sarcasm, he said, "With all due respect, Your Honor, we are dealing with a young lawyer who, despite his enthusiasm, does not seem to fully grasp the complexities of the law." It was a predictable move, the classic strategy of discrediting the opponent instead of refuting their arguments. But José didn't flinch. He wasn't there to win by shouting. He had the truth on his side, and he knew that's how he would win. Taking a deep breath, José met Tavares's gaze and responded calmly, "Counselor Tavares, the law is not measured by age or appearance, but by facts and evidence. And the facts show that your company falsified documents to seize property that does not belong to you." His response was sharp but not exaggerated, delivered with a weight that reverberated throughout the room. Some of the other attorneys exchanged looks, realizing that this young lawyer wasn't someone to be underestimated. Even Judge Braga leaned slightly forward, watching José with a newfound respect. Tavares tried to counterattack. He cited articles from the Civil Code, used complex legal jargon, and attempted to confuse the courtroom. But José was ready for him. For every argument Tavares presented, José had a solid response. "You mentioned Article 1245 of the Civil Code, which deals with property transfer, but you conveniently ignored Article 1246, which invalidates such transfers when fraud is involved," José rebutted without hesitation. It was a legal checkmate. Tavares opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, realizing that anything else he said would only make things worse for him. The courtroom fell silent, absorbing what had just happened. The young lawyer had not only dismantled the corporation's defense, but had done so with a level of precision that no one expected. Judge Braga crossed his arms, studying José as if seeing him for the first time, perhaps deep down even admiring his courage and intelligence. But there was still one last step left. All eyes turned to the judge, waiting for the ruling that would decide Marta Silva's fate. Judge Braga remained silent for a few moments, flipping through the documents José Rafael had presented. The courtroom felt heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the verdict. Marcos Tavares, the corporation's attorney, still tried to maintain his composure, but his rigid posture betrayed his tension. Sitting at the defense table, Marta Silva clutched her trembling hands in her lap, her eyes glistening with anticipation. The decision that would come in the next few seconds would determine the fate of her home, her history, her entire life. Finally, Judge Braga adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat before speaking. After reviewing the evidence presented and considering the arguments made by both parties, it is evident that fraud was committed in the documentation regarding ownership of the property, he stated, pausing to observe the reaction of the corporation's lawyers before continuing. Therefore, I rule that the property legally remains in the possession of Mrs. Marta Silva, and that appropriate legal actions be taken regarding the irregularities found. The ruling thundered through the courtroom. For a brief moment, silence filled the room, and then Marta Silva covered her face with her hands, overcome with emotion. Murmurs quickly spread among the spectators. José Rafael exhaled deeply, feeling the full weight of that moment. He had just made history. He had confronted a system designed to exclude him, and not only proved he belonged, but emerged victorious. Even Judge Braga looked at him differently now. There was no longer doubt in his eyes, only recognition. While Tavares hurriedly gathered his papers, clearly frustrated, José turned to Marta. She stood up slowly and, without saying a word, grasped his hands firmly, a silent gesture of gratitude and relief. But José knew that this wasn't the end. This victory wasn't just an isolated case. It was a symbol, a catalyst for something bigger. And deep inside, he was already planning his next move. The court ruling did not remain within the walls of that courtroom. Within a few hours, the story began to spread like wildfire. At first, it was just a whisper among the lawyers present, but soon social media picked it up, and before José Rafael could even process it, his name was trending. The 17-year-old lawyer who defeated a corporate giant. The headline sounded surreal, almost like fiction, but it was real, and more than that, it was inspiring. José had not only won a case, he had proven to an entire generation that determination and intelligence could break any system-imposed barrier. His phone didn't stop ringing. Requests for interviews, invitations to speak at universities, messages from young people who saw themselves in him. Many said they had never believed they could achieve great things until they heard his story. But José didn't want this to be just a fleeting moment. He knew that his victory did not erase the deeper problem. How many other Marta Silvas were still losing their homes because they didn't have an advocate willing to fight for them? How many brilliant young minds gave up before even trying because no one had told them it was possible? That's how the Justice for All project was born, an initiative José created to provide free legal assistance to vulnerable families and mentorship for aspiring young lawyers. He didn't want to be just a headline, he wanted to be the change. In the months that followed, the project grew rapidly. Law students, attorneys, and professors joined the cause. The impact was tangible, and the once impossible barriers began to crumble. But José knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't interested in changing just one case, one life, or one moment. His focus was on the bigger picture, on the legacy he was building. And without realizing it, he was about to experience one of the most defining moments of his journey, a recognition from the last person he ever expected. Years passed, but José Rafael's name remained strong in the world of law and justice. The boy who had once been doubted in a courtroom was now a respected figure, a mentor to young talents, and the founder of one of the most impactful legal initiatives in the country. His project, Justice for All, had grown far beyond what he imagined. With support from seasoned attorneys, students, and volunteers, thousands of families had won battles against injustice that once seemed unwinnable. But to José, the greatest victory wasn't in courtrooms, it was in the lives he changed. Every young person who discovered their potential, every elderly person who kept their home, every injustice that was overturned, was a reminder that he was fulfilling his purpose. One day, José was invited to give a speech at a prestigious law association event. The auditorium was packed, and among the audience one familiar face caught his attention, Judge Joaquim Braga, the same judge who, years earlier, had doubted his ability. Now there was no skepticism in his gaze, only respect. When José took the stage, the room fell silent. He scanned the audience and spoke from the heart. No notes, no rehearsals, just the truth that had always guided him. They said I was too young. They said I didn't fit the profile. But they never said I wasn't capable. Because that was a decision only I could make. And believe me, it's the same decision that belongs to each one of you. After his speech, Judge Braga stood up, took the microphone, and in a completely unexpected gesture, publicly acknowledged his past mistake. José Rafael taught me something that took me years to understand. Justice is not measured by age, color, or social class. It is measured by courage, intelligence, and determination. And this young lawyer has all of that in abundance. The auditorium erupted in applause. José, smiling slightly, simply nodded. He had never needed validation to know his worth, but seeing this shift happen in real time was proof that his fight had not been in vain. Now, his name stood for resilience and transformation. Universities invited him to give lectures. Students across the country dreamed of following in his footsteps. But to him, none of that mattered as much as the feeling of a mission fulfilled. There was still so much to do, so many challenges ahead, so many injustices left to be fought. But if his journey had proven anything, it was that no obstacle was too big for those who truly believe in their potential. And so, while the world continued to tell his story, José Rafael kept writing new chapters, not just with words, but with actions that would leave an indelible legacy. Now tell me, how many times have you doubted your own potential just because someone told you that you weren't good enough? How many times have you believed that your background, your age, or your circumstances were impossible obstacles to overcome? José Rafael was never meant to be in that courtroom. The system was never designed for people like him, but instead of accepting the rules imposed by others, he created his own. And if he could do it, what's stopping you from doing the same? Maybe you're waiting for the perfect moment to take action. But let me tell you a secret. That moment will never come. You don't need permission to be great, just like José didn't need anyone's approval to become one of the most respected lawyers in the country. What you need is to decide right now that you're going to take control of your own story. So tell me, what will you do today to take your first step? If this story inspired you, imagine how many more powerful lessons are waiting for you. So don't leave without subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Here you'll find content that will open your mind, challenge your beliefs, and show you that anyone, yes, anyone, can change their destiny.